This is TLV1.
The Tel Aviv Review with Gilad Halpern.
Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review, a program dedicated to the word, to the thought and to debate, brought to you by the Van Leer Jerusalem Institute, which promotes humanistic, democratic and liberal values in the social discourse in Israel. I'm your host Gilad Halpern, and today's interview is being recorded on the premises of the 2016 conference of the Association for Israel Studies here in Jerusalem. My guest today is a historian at Chapman University in California, specializing in Italian Jewish history, but she's joining me today to discuss new methods of teaching the history of Zionism to American students. Dr. Shira Klein, hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review.
Hello, glad to be here.
So, in your day, when you were an undergraduate student, how was the history of Zionism taught?
It was taught primarily by using anthologies. Primary source anthologies. The classic ones are Hertzberg's The Zionist Idea. Another one is The Jew in the Modern World. And professors who used primary sources would often use those anthologies. And these anthologies are they're full of documents relating primarily to political history, somewhat diplomatic history, intellectual history, Zionist thinkers.
Such as what? The Declaration of Independence?
Such as the Declaration of Independence, such as, for instance, Nordau's Jewry of Muscle, such as the Bilu Manifesto.
Mm-hmm. So it was predominantly facts and figures?
It was predominantly, yes, a lot of facts and figures, but also a lot of writing by men, by thinkers, by ideologues, by heads of movements.
Mm-hmm. So you feel that this did injustice to the prospect of teaching the history of Zionism, or was it just boring and therefore ineffectual?
Well, I mean, boring is a matter of opinion, but it's...
No, but when you're an undergraduate student, boring is important. Yeah.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I think that all of these texts can be made to be exciting while teaching them, but my problem with them was more that they covered only a certain range of themes, and these themes are important, but they don't convey a lot of history, and they don't give voice to a lot of groups who make up that history.
Mm-hmm. Such as women?
Such as children, such as gays. Those are groups in terms of people, but also themes. If you think of gender and sexuality, if you think of migration, which is my field, so immigrant
migration
lives.
As in Aliyah.
Aliyah, yes. Mm-hmm. If we're talking about migration to Israel or to the Yishuv, themes like daily life, what people wore, what people ate, what people did in their free time.
Mm-hmm. So, which is essentially a perspective that is applied to the study of history across the board, isn't it?
That's right, yes. And I would say that in the last few decades it has become a lot more popular because people really realize that that's what the majority of people sort of engaged with. That was their life for the majority of people, mm-hmm. right? So the ideologues, the thinkers, they were a very small group of people.
So how do you fill that void? What do you bring to the table?
I like to use non-traditional primary sources, so I go beyond the canons, the traditional anthologies. And one source that I found is very useful, very effective in bringing to life these other themes is posters. Mm-hmm. So my presentation at the AIS as well is about how I use these posters to teach, in particular, one theme or one topic, which is migration history or the history of Aliyah. Mm-hmm. And that's also a theme that I study in my research. So I was really interested in communicating to students how ideologues thought about Aliyah, how Zionist thinkers or Zionist leaders wanted Aliyah to be, and how it really was.
Mm-hmm. So basically you do some sort of, I wouldn't call it comparative, but complementary use of sources, the anthologies as well as the new primary sources?
Sometimes I use the anthologies, yes, but I like students to work with the posters as a central source, not just as a sort of appendix.
Mm-hmm. And what really is the added value of it? What does it really add to the way that people understand it? What do you hear back from your students?
That's a good question. You know, teaching evaluations are a very good way of knowing what is working and what isn't working. And teaching evaluations across the board, my teaching evaluations, and from research I've read, I see it's not just in my case, show that students respond a lot better to a combination of visual sources and textual sources. Mm-hmm. And in what way do they respond better? Well, first of all, you said textual sources alone are boring, right? Well, posters are a lot more fun, and in an age of decreasing enrollment in the humanities, that's important, right? Mm-hmm. Draw students to the class. But also, more seriously, it enables students to engage with questions pertaining to Aliyah, pertaining to immigration history, that they might not when using a text.
Such as?
I explain to students that Aliyah is not just a description of movement from one place to another. It's an entire value system. Mm-hmm. It was a value system that ever since the late 19th century elevated the homeland over the diaspora, Eretz Israel over the Galut or the Gola, which came to have negative connotations, and elevated a rural way of life over an urban way of life, and elevated Hebrew over foreign languages. Mm-hmm. So Aliyah is a very complicated concept, and it's something that if you take a textual source, you might not get at all of these components. Or you might get at one of these components, but in a very, it would take a very long time for a student to actually really figure out what is being said. And if you take a poster, it could have all of these components all in one, right?
A poster is worth 1,000 words.
Exactly,
mm-hmm.
exactly. And it really is. And
give us an example. Can you describe some of the posters that really convey the message very effectively?
Absolutely. There is a poster from the 1950s that shows...
So 1950s, after the establishment of the state?
Yes, shortly after the establishment of the state, but when this idea of Aliyah was very much current, that shows a signpost. One side of the signpost has a sign reading Hebrew, or Ivrit. It's very large, clear letters, and it points to a sunny field, blue skies, and a water tower in the distance. Lovely rural setting. The other side of the signpost has lots of little signs, rather dark, small font, and they've got any number of languages written on them, whether it's Polish, Spanish, French, German, Yiddish, and it's pointing to a dark background with barbed wire, and essentially there isn't much in there. Mm-hmm. And it takes up the smaller part of the poster. Now this poster, in just sort of one glance, you see both the elevation of Hebrew over other languages, both the elevation of the homeland over the diaspora, because the barbed wire represents the diaspora, right? This is in the 1950s, shortly after World War II, the concentration camps. It shows the elevation of rural life over urban life, because you see this water tower in the distance, that's a sign of the kibbutzim, the moshavim, blue skies, a rural landscape. So it shows us all of these things in just one poster, whereas if you had looked at a Zionist text, let's say a speech by Ben-Gurion, or a poem by Gordon, or prose by Max Nordau, you would see one or two of these things. Mm-hmm. It would take a very long time to go through. It would be just the opinion of one person, and you'd wonder how many people actually heard this speech, how many people actually read this manifesto. Whereas these posters were all around. They were catchy, they were colorful. So that's just one example of how...
So I think it's really... drawing on your last point, it's not really the visual aspect of it, but also the fact that you're looking into mass communication in studying an ideological revolution that really had to do with propaganda.
Absolutely. Now, propaganda is a loaded word. It could be...
Inculcation,
yes,
or whatever you want to call it.
Right, or a poster showing the right values, right? Yeah. I mean, it depends on who's the person talking about this. But that's right. These posters were in mass circulation. There were hundreds or thousands of them even. They were all over Europe. They were all over Palestine, the Yishuv, later Israel. And they could be seen anywhere, by anyone. So it also helps show the students, you asked why use these posters, it also helps show the students just how exposed to these ideas immigrants were, right? It's not just ideas that were in some speech, right, made by one person at one point in time, perhaps heard by thousands on the radio, but then
that's
forgotten.
really the strength of the Zionist revolution, isn't it? It really permeated and trickled down to virtually the entire population.
Zionist ideas, yeah. Yes. Now, where it becomes interesting is that these ideas often remain ideas, right? So this is another thing I like to do with students is contrast the message of the posters with what happened in reality. So the posters might say, it's wonderful to become a kibbutznik, to become a chalutz. It's wonderful to abandon urban bourgeois life and turn to honest labor on the farm. But in fact, we know, as historians, we know that the majority of Jewish immigrants, the majority of Jewish society in the Yishuv and in Israel, did not choose to settle in a kibbutz. For very many years, Jewish immigrants did not choose Hebrew over their languages, or they spoke both. For very many years, they did not see the land they had been born in as this reviled diaspora, right? So that's another important message to communicate to students, that these posters are the message, they're the ideal. What about reality?
Very interesting. And, another factor when it comes to really evaluating the teaching is the prior knowledge that your students have. And I know that in America, especially on campuses, this is really a tricky business. What can you tell us about that? When they come to your classes, do they know anything about Zionism, about Israel?
I'd say that some of them have prior assumptions. Some of them come in knowing very, very little. Many of my students are not Jewish. Many of them really know very little about Judaism. I don't ask who has what background. I often find actually that those who have the least background are the best learners because they don't have to deconstruct all sorts of...
They come with an open mind.
Exactly. They come with an open mind. And often those who come with a Jewish learning background, they'll struggle a little bit with understanding this difference between the ideal and the reality because they've been raised on this ideal.
Yeah, very interesting. All right, Dr. Shira Klein, this is all we have time for today. Thank you very much for joining us. You're a historian at Chapman University in California, specializing in Italian Jewish history, but also teaching the history of Zionism, which is exactly what we talked about here. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Gilad.
And also big thanks to Alex Benish, our sound engineer, and to the Van Leer Institute for their generous support. If you like this podcast, there are many more where it came from. Just go to www.tlv1.fm/podcasts and take your pick.
I'll be your home, I'll be your country, I'll be your northern star. I'll be your landscape, be your road, I'll be the key to follow who you are. I'll be the sun, I'll be the shore, I'll be the wind that blows the sound. I'll be the door, I'll be somewhere to open up.